Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Angel DeSantis. I am a religious trauma counselor and a yoga teacher. And in today's video, I'm going to share my resources and the things that have helped me in the hopes that they can help you. And I've had a lot of people ask me, like, what did you do? What helped? And I've done a lot of things over the last decade plus. And I think that the most useful thing that I did, the number one thing, is that I never stopped trying. And so if you are willing to try and get more information, as long as you are willing to try new things, you will like dig yourself up out of the hole that somebody else put you in. So it's really important that if you are willing to try, that will save you. But I'm going to share with you 10 books, 10, 8. I'm going to share with you a stack of books. And these are all the things that I have found incredibly useful, and I'm going to share them with you, and I hope that you find them useful. They are not in level of importance. They are in level of cognitive, cognitive load. So the ones that I will share first are fairly easy to read. They're thin, they're easy, you can get through them real quick. I was uneducated when I read these. Now I'm super educated. Not really. But there is something to be said about coming across a really thick, heavy book that requires a lot of thinking ability, that if you don't have at the moment you run across the book, then you can be tempted to be like, oh, this is not a good book. So I'm going to share them in relation to cognitive load. But the first one that I'm going to share, if I was on a desert island and I could only have one book, Art of Living, Epictetus. Epictetus is a Stoic, or was a Stoic. He lives a hell of a long time ago, 55 CE until 135 CE in Rome. And he is my favorite Stoic. There are a lot of Stoics. He's my favorite because he used to be a slave, and some other Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, was an emperor. And so sometimes I'll read some of his stuff and I don't resonate. With Epictetus, he used to be a slave, so the way he speaks on hardship is really beautiful. And so if you've been through hardship and need a clear thought pattern around it, I highly, highly recommend Epictetus. I have a necklace with Epictetus on it. That's how much I love him. And very easy to digest. This is a complete thought, and then this is a complete thought. Some of them are really small, and they're just like chunk sizes. And what this did for me is it allowed me mental clarity. It allowed me thought and logic. And those were the things that I didn't have. I didn't have the ability to think clearly, and I had no logic. Because when you grow up in something religious, if God did it, if God wants it, and that's the reasoning for everything, so you're not taught to think well. So this was super helpful for me. The second book that I'm going to recommend, I don't have a copy of because every time I buy a copy, I give it away. But it's The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown, and I will link it. And I think the two books on my desert island, if I had this book and Brene Brown's Gifts of Imperfection, I think they play off each other really well, because Stoicism can sometimes play into suppression of self. So I think it's good until a certain point, and then at some point you gotta let it go. I still love it, but I realized it was starting to fuel the suppression that I had, like the cap that I had on my emotions. And Brene Brown's Gifts of Imperfection talks about vulnerability. And I'll link Brene Brown because I can't not. She's wonderful. So Brene Brown, Gifts of Imperfection is my second recommendation. The third one is Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes by Daniel Everett. And Daniel Everett, I have a headier book by him coming up. But this one is really interesting. This guy, Daniel Everett, he was a I'm going to say linguist, and I know that's not correct. He studied language, and so he went to the Amazon to study tribes and learn their language. But he went with the missionary mindset of, y'all need God and I'm here to rescue you. And he ended up realizing that maybe the tribes are not so barbaric and maybe I'm barbaric. Because the level of superiority and entitlement and irrationality that you need in order to go into somebody else's already made life and tell them that you're doing your life wrong and I know how to live your life better than you do is stunning. And I think that he captures it really well, and he captures his own inner journey of kind of realizing, like, wait, am I the one who's wrong here? So Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes by Daniel Everett is my fourth recommendation. Third recommendation. Fourth recommendation is this, Leaving the Fold by Marlene Winell. Really important work, especially if you're coming out of something, if you're coming out of a religion, or if you're coming out of something that is oppressive, specifically in regards to religion, if you are leaving your church or leaving your faith. She, I believe, joined a church when she was in college, and she stayed part of it, and then she left, and she is a PhD in something. But really, really useful. Yes, PhD, there it is. Beautiful. Really kind of a fundamental book if you are leaving a fundamental religion, or if you're leaving religion in general. So Leaving the Fold by Marlene Winell. Highly recommend. Okay. And then kind of as the segue between this one and then the headier books, I highly recommend The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And this one is really, really lovely. She talks about recovering your creativity and recovering your sense of possibility. And if you see or hear this recommendation and you're like, yes, but I'm not creative, this is for you. Because all human beings, we are born intuitively, we're born creative and curious. And I was an incredibly curious and creative child, and that brought me a lot of pain because I was constantly in trouble. So recovering that sense of, you know what, I get to discover, I get to play, I get to learn the ways that I'm creative. Recovering that as an adult has been really paramount in my healing journey of healing trauma, because it just really has been. So I highly recommend this. It says a course in discovering and recovering your creative self. And you do have a creative self. And also her morning pages, she suggests that you write out just your thoughts in a free flow form. And that was a really, really interesting practice for me that I still keep to this day. So highly recommend The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Okay, so now we're getting into more cognitively heavy stuff. This one, not so much, but this one was really helpful for me. This is The Science of Good and Evil by Michael Shermer. And this isn't that difficult of a read, but it is really, really interesting. And this deals with ethics and morality as in regards to evolution, and how ethics and morality are actually really good things, and they are the things that move the human race forward. Because I had only heard about morality and ethics as it relates to God, and then I was taught if you don't have God, then you don't have morals or ethics. And this talks about how those are natural inborn things in order to further along the human race. And also through this book, I learned about fuzzy logic. And that was a really helpful thing to learn, because according to the religion that I was in, things were either black or white. It's God or Satan. And the discovery for me of fuzzy logic was incredible. I cried because it just released so much stuff that I was trying to hold, that I was like, well, if this is good and this is bad, I want to hold on to this, to the thing that I was taught was good, even though it's crap and it's killing me, because I don't want to be bad. And fuzzy logic just showed me that there are other options. Like, it's not an either or. It's not your God or your Satan. There's everything in between, and everything is done on a scale. So fuzzy logic. So this Science of Good and Evil by Michael Shermer deals with morals and ethics. And if you've never heard of fuzzy logic, highly recommend. So there's that. And then Conjoint Family Therapy by Virginia Satir. This one, really, really interesting. And if you have any sort of family dynamic that is difficult to deal with, which if you grew up in a religious environment or a religiously abusive environment, it is likely that you have a difficult family dynamic. I know that mine is quite interesting. But this one talks about family dynamics And it talks about when, the person, the head of the household, is a narcissist, how does that trickle down through the family? What do you need to look out for? Or it talks about when there's one child that's really, really difficult, how the family dynamics change. And the thing that I found really helpful is, hold please, let me find this dialogue. Okay. Where it does lines of dialogue, and I would read this and realize, like, oh my God, I've had this exact conversation, or I understand really well the dynamics of this conversation. And what it allowed me to do was to understand that, like, oh, I'm not the only one who goes through this. It's literally so common that you can write a book on it. And the dialogue, I've heard that dialogue. So it made me feel a lot less alone. It made me be like, oh, everyone struggles, or there are certain dynamics that everybody has to struggle with. And she kind of talks about the way to healing, and kind of where's the rub, like what happened and what sort of coping mechanism did you have to come up with because of your family dynamic. So Conjoint Family Therapy by Virginia Satir, really well done and highly recommend. Okay. Now we are going into Daniel Everett again. He was the one that wrote the Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, the book about the Amazon. He also wrote this, Dark Matter of the Mind, the Culturally Articulated Unconscious. And this is where he talks about how there is a dark side to our nature, or there are certain things that happen. And if you do not go into your unconscious and make it conscious, it still will control you. So not acknowledging that a thing exists doesn't mean that the thing doesn't exist. And he talks about the unconscious in a really important way, I feel, and I learned a lot from this. It is very heavy. This is probably one of the heavier books where there's it's a lot of big words. And I definitely read it when I first read it. I had this open and then a dictionary open, and I would read them like this, and then I would go into the dictionary, and then I would turn a page, and it would take me a really long time to get through it. But that's me. That's because I didn't go to school. So if you've gone to school, it might be a little easier. But Dark Matter of the Mind by Daniel Everett. Highly recommend. It's deep stuff. Okay. Finally, it's probably the most heady, The Polyvagal Theory in Therapy by Deb Dana. And this is about trauma. It's a trauma therapy. And this book is generally I think they recommend it for therapists and psychologists. And it is about how your nervous system reacts to trauma, and a little bit of how to retrain it. And it talks about how to repair your relationship to your nervous system. So this one is fairly heavy. Again, it is for therapists, but this is a subject that I find really, really interesting. So I want to learn about it. So it deals with your nervous system and how traumatic past events can affect your nervous system and kind of what to do about it. So if that interests you, super highly recommend. Okay. Last, I'm going to recommend this, and please don't let the size of it freak you out. This is how big it is. When it came in the mail, I was like, you have got to be kidding me. But I do recommend the subject matter, which is chess. And this is not my first book on chess. My first book on chess, which I love, because I could bring it around with me, because this one is a heifer. I can't really bring it around with me. But the first chess book that I had was Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess, and that's one that I really highly recommend. And the reason that I recommend chess, well, I actually recommend any sort of game that allows you to see time and dynamics, because when you are in something religious, generally you will be taught that there is an end to the world. Maybe, yes. Yes, that's true. But in my case, growing up in a cult, part of the reason you would stay in the cult is because there was always an end of the world. And so what that did is it took away time from me. And so I never considered time when making decisions. I would make a decision and then suffer the consequences, and then make a decision and suffer the consequences. And when I started learning about chess, it allowed me to be like, oh, wait, if I make a move, it affects everyone else on the board. And so I need to take a lot of things into consideration when I'm making this move. And that just opened up ways in my brain to think. And then I took that pattern of thinking and kind of put it on my life. And I was like, wait, if I make this decision, who does it affect? and kind of what's the long game. So I recommend any game, whether it's chess or it's Go or it's a long-term strategy game, something that allows your mind to think in a much bigger, longer fashion, that allows you to see that what you do affects more players. And it is simply just getting the mind to churn. And the reason I recommend it be a game is because it should be fun. And for me, I played against myself. I still play chess against myself because I'm the one who's playing. So yes, I lose, but also I win. But it should be a fun thing. And that way, when you're making life decisions, if you're taking in that same pattern, it can make you think, okay, if I make this move, what happens? But then also understanding that there will always be another move possible, I think it was really important. And it allowed me to live life less stressed because I understood that there was always a way forward. There's always multiple players in effect. And when you look at your life, you'll see there are multiple players in the game. What you do affects people, and what they do affects you. So just the ability to think longer term and look at life kind of in a macro way was something that I was deprived of growing up with a time limit of like the world was always going to end. And now I don't have that time limit, and my brain had to expand into that because it wasn't built that way. So learning about chess allowed me to take in a much bigger picture and to see myself on the board. This book, I accidentally bought this book, but it does this where it teaches like combinations. It's literally, this whole book is that. And this one is dense, but I am going to link the Bobby Fischer one. I'll link this one too. It is 5,334 problems. And I have that many problems. But if there are that many problems, there are also that many solutions. So I recommend that. And I think that wraps up all of my recommendations. I hope that there's something in there that like piqued your interest. If you want more information on it, leave me a comment. And if there is something that you went through that helped you, that you want to share either with me or with people in the comments, leave that below as well. I think it's really helpful to know that there are resources out there and to know that you're not the only one who's been through what you've been through. So thank you for sticking with me so far. I hope there was something in here that was useful for you. And thank you for being here. And I'll see you next time.